Welcome to Health System CIO's interview with Scott Smiser, CTO at Emory Healthcare. I'm Anthony Guerra, founder and editor in chief. Scott, thanks for joining me.
Hey Anthony, how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. It was great to see you at the John Fall Forum in
Yeah,
lovely San Diego. So that was a pleasure. Today I just want to follow up with you after the conference. I like to see if that time around colleagues and taking in perhaps some sessions gets your juices flowing or your thoughts going about any particular topic. Sometimes it could reinforce the direction you're going in and say, yes, I'm hearing a lot of this. Sometimes it might give you some other thoughts. Just wondering about you, any sort of after effects from the show on what you're thinking about.
yeah, no. The weather obviously in San Diego is obviously perfect year round. I wish I lived there, but I think honestly, my walkaways, Anthony, from the discussion and the conference was just a reaffirmation of where we're going as an organization, as an industry. It's always good to interact with people at your peer level in a leadership standpoint of what they're thinking about, what keeps them up at night. But I didn't have any course corrections per se coming out of the conference. It was just good to get a lot of reaffirmations of what people are doing as far as data strategies, AI strategies, technology strategies, et cetera. So it was a good time. I'm a little worn out. I'm trying to recover and get my inbox recovered. But yeah, it was a good time.
This whole hype cycle concept that Gartner put out, certainly, you look back on something like blockchain, and I mean, would we all agree that was a super hyped technology that really didn't find a foothold in healthcare? So if you had sort of tuned in during that one phase, you call it a year or a couple years or 6 months, you would have said, "Oh my god, if I'm not doing this, I'm nowhere." And
Right.
it didn't bear out that there was no real use cases for healthcare. It's great for what it does with Bitcoin and all that kind of thing, but it
Yeah.
didn't seem to have use cases in healthcare. We don't think that's the case with AI. Certainly, from what I'm seeing and hearing, it's not the same. Correct?
Yeah, I would agree. I think if you kind of popped your head up and heard about blockchain, you would think, oh, I'm getting left behind. And then nothing really came to fruition. But to what you're saying, I feel like AI is a little bit different in that the applicability and the use cases around how AI could be applied within the continuum of care completely and not just one or two places within the healthcare setting. I think it's very interesting. I will tell you, I feel like every conference I go to, it's everything AI, right?
Yeah.
You're going to talk everything's got an AI spin to it, which is interesting. So I think some of that chatter will start to settle in, but I do think AI is different than blockchain and other buzz or hype that's been in our industry before.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the idea of identifying use cases. I've got this theory that, and we certainly see that there's education going on. IT executives are saying we need to educate the workforce on what these tools can do.
Mm,
Um, and what makes sense to me is that certainly makes sense to educate them. And then because they're the ones in the workflows, deeply in the workflows, and sort of let's rely on them to find the use cases and let those bubble up through governance. Because if we do a top-down approach where we say, all right, IT executives, even in collaboration with some leaders who may be not quite in the trenches of the workflow, we're going to identify those use cases and say where AI is going to be injected. It makes more sense to me. It could be a little unwieldy, but it makes more sense to me to educate them and then use governance to let that bubble up and then decide, okay, yes, all these cases have been surfaced. These three make sense. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I agree. I think, from a technology standpoint, we're always good at, we feel like we know best when we don't. I think we could have very particular use cases to deploy to clinicians and caregivers in a meaningful way. But to what you're saying, I think organizations need to figure out how to curate a governance structure that allows frontline clinicians as they're understanding more about AI. I think about Apple in particular as AI and is being embedded in their consumer devices. Let them come up with ways to use that technology in a meaningful way that could help them um, be smarter and more productive. I can tell you at Emory, we've leaned in big with ambient listening. So, and there's not a time that I don't round in the facilities or interact with doctors that say, this has changed my life. It's changed the pajama time per se in the evening where, they're not doing documentation till 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night, that they're actually able to go home after a shift and spend time with their family. So that's where it's got my interest perked as far as how we're changing their productivity, their value based, and what we're seeing with AI and ambient listening is we didn't say if we make you more efficient, you're going to see more patients. Dr. Erskine in his session was talking about how statistically we're seeing the doctors that are using ambient listening are seeing on average about two more patients in that workflow. So we didn't require that as part of the technology give, but we're just seeing that they've got the threshold to take on more patient volume and see more patients. That's critical in a specialty setting where some consumers are trying to get into a specialist. It's taken 6 to 8 weeks sometimes to get into a specialist. So, but I look at it not, AI from the standpoint of how do we really wrap that around the EMR experience, not just for the docs, but for the nurses and the frontline workers that are interacting with patients. How do we, from a nursing documentation standpoint, how do we use AI to really engage them with order sets or engage them with protocols where they're not having to document as much in the system that what they're doing with the patient and how they're interacting, that AI is capturing that. So yeah, I think AI is going to be interesting to watch it play out over the next couple of years, in my opinion.
I mean, the EMR experience, the rollout of the EMRs, it was necessary, had to be done, right? Everything had to get digitized, but it wasn't met usually with excitement, right? It wasn't, right? It wasn't
No,
met with
no, no.
excitement. It was and this is where we get to burnout, right? There's a relationship between EMRs and burnout and excessive clicking and all this kind of thing. And it's almost like AI will be the thing that smooths out all that stuff, right? AI can and maybe I'm wrong here, but AI is what is gonna make the IT folks get high fives walking down the hall. The
Oh,
EMRs
yeah.
certainly didn't do that, right? You didn't
No,
get high fives. Had to be done, but you didn't get the high fives. But this, you mentioned the ambient listening. I mean, this is what it's all about, right? I mean, IT underpinning workflow, making the business function smoother. So I don't know. I feel like I'm becoming a big cheerleader for this stuff, but I gotta cool myself down. You can get really excited about this stuff.
no, I mean, I'm right there with you, Anthony. I think, as I interact with caregivers, ambient listening is the first technology that we've rolled in a number of years. And I selfishly do a plug on what we've done with Apple devices and deployment. That coupled together between a device endpoint that they would prefer over a Windows experience, coupled with ambient listening, we're changing the game in a lot of ways. And you're right. I mean, during the EMR era of ARA and meaningful use, stage 1, 2, 3, it was we all have to do this. This wasn't IT that conjured up this, let's put in EMRs and make everybody's world more complicated. It was, we're being required regulatory wise to put these in, and you know, AI wrapped around it in a meaningful way, and you're seeing the AMR providers get into this. I think it could change the game. And one of our pillars of success that we monitor at Emory is how are we relieving that physician burden, that clinician burden? So those kind of technologies really play into that formula for success, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a good point. Is are we relieving the burden? Because sometimes you put in an IT tool and you don't quite do that. At best, it can be a wash if it's a lot of work before, with AI, it's got to be good stuff going in and then reviewed coming out. So there's a little bit of work that you have to do. Your name has to, you have to sign it, right? Whatever's coming out, it's got to be attributed to a human. Can't
Yeah,
just be, well, the AI said it, right? So it's got to be, if it does ambient listening and documents an encounter, that's got to be reviewed and signed off on, right? So
right.
this is where we catch the hallucinations and all these kind of things. So there's a little bit of work around it, but as you said, we got to make sure that overall it's a big net positive, which we think it is. But sometimes there's a little bit of work to get there, right? It's not zero
Absolutely.
work.
One of the things at Emory that we're looking at is just a black box technology in the OR setting. If you think about all the documentation that's derived during a surgical case,
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
potentially mic up the ORs with a black box ambient listening solution that captures everybody talking in a way that the narrative, the intra-op narrative of the chart is structured, in a textual format that they can look at and review after the case and say, yep, that's what happened in that case. And then it really supports all those caregivers to really focus on the patient
Mhm. Mhm.
or stay away from the computer of what they're doing because they know that the microphones in the room are capturing what we're doing and it's going to have a note for them after that episode. Or it could even be live, Anthony, that it's coming up on the screen as they're going through. So each character or actor in the OR case is actually seeing their narrative generate live on the computer screen as they're going through the case.
Yeah, it's really mind-blowing stuff. Um, this stuff is gonna change probably month by month in terms of what it can do, right? I mean, what these tools can do today is probably certainly different than what they'll do 6 months from now, possibly even than 1 month from now. How do you how do we keep on top of that? How do you keep on top of that so that you're able to leverage what it can do and you're not dated? It's not like, "Oh, we should try this." Oh, well, people were been doing that for a year and a half. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's how do we keep up with this? And I know in healthcare, we have to be very careful about change management.
Right.
Anywhere we have to be careful about change management. And it's very hard to make changes in healthcare. I think of an example. I read an article about changing a workflow, a clinician workflow that the clinicians wanted changed. It's a lot of process, a lot of governance. It's got to go through steps. It's got to go through approvals. So rightly speaking, with good reason, things take time. When we want to be nimble, we can run up against that sometimes and be frustrated. If we roll out a new way of doing things and 6 months later we want to roll out a new way of doing things because new things can be done, there's only so much change management an organization can take. Users may say, "Hey, listen, you just gave me a new process 6 months ago. Now you want to give me a new process." What are your thoughts on all that?
No, I mean, don't do change for change's sake, right? So, I mean, organizational change management is it's key. For what I do in a technology stack, I typically try to curate a small proof of concept group on any kind of new use case so that we've got volunteers that have kind of been curated, if you will, out of operations that's interested in that solution. And we try to do that in a proof of concept before we ever try to take it to scale
Hmm.
so that we vetted it at least, in a department, a unit, or a facility before we roll it across the enterprise. So I agree. I don't think people should just wild west start, implementing change because they went to a conference or heard about something cool and try to do it across, 26,000 employees across 11 facilities like we've got in Emory. But I mean, try to focus small and get success and snowball that. But yeah, you reach a saturation point with nurses in particular. And if you think about what everybody's been through with, that with COVID and the pandemic and coming out of that, and you still just have a lot of people coming and going out of different departments that you've got to be careful about what you introduce as far as change to the operations. I completely agree.
So you just made me think of the the point of sometimes people can't take on change because they feel overburdened, but you're trying to bring change to them that will relieve that burden. So you can have that kind of right. So you talk about
I,
nursing documentation. They may feel I'm frazzled. I've got too much on my plate, but you're like, wait, I'm going to give you something that's going to help that. So you can have that sort of conflict there.
yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it, what I'm talking about with peers and what I've seen in my own organization is moving IT from like a cost center to a value
Hmm.
center.
Hmm.
In that we're trying to do things in a meaningful way for users that they feel like we're a partner.
Hmm.
We absolved ourselves of the term IT at Emory. We're Emory Digital, and
Mm.
I thought it would take years for something like that to stick, and it stuck within like a couple of months.
Hmm.
You hear people on operation calls like, "Well, do we have somebody from our digital partners on the call?" So they're already referring to us as a partner in that equation. So I think as long as organizations and technology leaders are positioning themselves where you're a value center, you're not a cost center, but the value center and the value proposition is we're doing stuff to try to make your world better, not make your
Mhm.
world more complicated. And I think too often we just deploy technology for technology's sake,
Right.
or we deploy it because we're required, right? And we don't think about just the impact that that has to a frontline clinician. And I always try to tell my team, I whittle this down to, I'm like, folks, it could be me, you, someone you know or love that's laying in that bed or in that MRI tunnel that's getting care at these facilities. And I've got to know that what we're doing today is changing the way they can do their care delivery tomorrow and in the days to come. So
Yeah, it's deeply meaningful to think that a clinician can be more focused on you because there's all this documentation being done in the background. So they don't have to have their attention distracted, be looking at the screen. They can be more locked in on you.
yeah.
That's meaningful. That's deeply meaningful.
Yeah. Well, how often have you gone to a care provider where they've sat down in the room? I guess I've been victim of this, that you've sat down in a care setting and they turn their back to you and start logging in.
Mhm. Mhm. Yep.
And I've sat there, Anthony, in those moments, and I'm thinking, did I have a hand in this? You know, because they're using computer. I mean, they're using computers and software solutions that I have, but it's really depersonalized in some ways. So I think organizations that are getting it right are the ones that are making sure that you're using tools like ambient listening and other things so that you can focus on the patient experience and that face-to-face contact and let tools do the back end documentation and stuff.
100%. Let's touch real quick on the MacBook stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
it's great. We spoke last time. I'm a super fan. Um, I'm an Apple super fan. It's just the proof's in the pudding. I mean, it's just so I wonder if you think, you know, a lot of organizations may not be thinking about that. May not be as we talked in the last time. They don't realize that these tools can work in these environments. They think of it as a consumer tool or whatnot. But if you're not thinking about the hardware that's in their hands and that they're using, if you're just focused on the software and all the fun AI stuff, and you don't realize the hardware matters, the tools matter. So that's people, if they're thinking holistically, you got to include that, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, our experience with and that session at Chime was a hard one to be in because we were right before lunch. And I told him, I said, this is a tough place to be between you and lunch. But what was interesting in that session is they literally stayed almost 20 minutes after the
Yep.
session was over.
Yep.
And the microphone was passing around. So there was a buzz in the room, which Laura and I really appreciated. But to what you're saying, you know, I'll lean towards a MacBook device as a preference for portability. But if you want to use a Windows product, I'll give you a Windows product as well. But what I'm seeing, and I think we've talked about this before, is the way they're feeling about interacting with that device. And Epic is local, right? I mean, it's not going through Citrix. It's a full-blown app that's running local, and Epic is Epic. That experience is the same, but the experience of using Epic on a Mac device, what I've seen is they light up about it.
Mhm.
And it's created some FOMO, some fear of missing out with some other docs that they're like, well, I wasn't part of the early adopter program. How do you get your name on the list? I want to use one of these. So, if I can create a buzz about the endpoint to get them more excited about the work that they're doing to change lives and provide hope, I'm all for it. But yeah, there's been a buzz about the Apple devices, and they're not just consumer devices. And I think we heard that in the session loud and clear. I think there's a lot of groundswell in the industry, which is exciting, right? That people
Yep.
are starting to look at it a different way. I think for us at Emory, the thing that we've done is we've shown we can do one-to-one with those MacBooks. We've shown we can do one-to-many with a full nursing unit. So we're exploring the concept of how do we do one-to-all? And it's
Mhm.
not just, it could be wearables and iPads and the whole ecosystem of Apple. So that's what we've got the team focused on right now for 2025 is to think through how do we take it to the next level? And
Mhm.
if we can be a lighthouse or a beacon for other organizations to come visit us and say, how did you do it? How did you pull it off? I'm all for it being a Mac fan. So I'm glad you're a Mac fan as well.
I certainly am. So you mentioned that as a final question, you mentioned obviously you're going to be working on the MacBook stuff. We talked a lot about AI. Any other main projects in the next 6 months to a year? Things you're looking at?
Yeah, a big project that we're doing right now is just our journey to the cloud. So we're in the process of dispositioning our primary and DR data centers out of Atlanta into the cloud. So that's a huge effort that we've got going on while we're rolling down the road at 100 miles an hour, right? So we're dispositioning everything into the cloud.
All right. What do they say? You can't. It's hard to do things to the plane while it's flying, but you're doing it. That's what you got to do. That's the way it
But I
works.
don't know that we have a choice, Anthony. I think we just got to make it happen. But yeah, our teams are not short of things to do around here.
I real quick. I've interviewed, work with Dr. Erskine before. Saw him at the show.
Yeah,
Met Laura in person. Everybody, it seems like you got a really great vibe over there. I mean,
yeah.
Dr. Erskine he's got a great vibe about him. You guys seem happy, energized, and engaged. It seems like you got a good culture over there in IT.
I think we do. You said IT, you got to say digital. Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Gotcha on that one. But no, I mean, Dr. Erskine, he came up from Mass Brigham and joined our organization last spring. He's been a breath of fresh air. His leadership style is like no other. I mean, I tell people I'm like he's kind of the Steve Jobs of healthcare to me. So it's exciting to work with him, and he's one of those leaders that I've been very fortunate over the last year and a half to work with him. So yeah, he's been an inspiration. But I feel like we got a great team.
Yeah.
We're doing some cool things in Atlanta, and we want to keep it going.
Well, culture eats everything. We know that. So good culture, you can do anything, and bad culture, you can't do much. At
Yeah.
least from everybody I talk to. So, Scott, awesome conversation. Always a pleasure to chat with you. I want to thank you for your time today.
Hey, thank you, Anthony.